This playthrough is rated M for mature.
Greetings and salutations, viewers. Vauldemare back here with more Hakuōki, Stories of the Shinsengumi. In the last episode, the battle between the Choshu and Satsuma armies against the shogunate has started, though the first day of fighting has come to an end. And our main character, unfortunately, like always, has gone to hide in the corner because she can't do anything, even though in the previous chapter she had gotten a vote of confidence and then just all of a sudden went back to her normal ways. What's up with this lady? She can't make up if she wants to do something or just let everything just happen around her. Anyway, let's get back to it. We found out that the soldiers have come back for the first day of fighting, but they haven't felt very good about themselves. Let's see what they say. I had thought the bombardment finished, but as night fell, it resumed. The cannonballs left small fires behind when they hit, and our assailants seemed to use those fires to sight in on the magistrate's office as the attacks soon grew more intense. Our situation grew steadily more desperate until Hijikata finally called a meeting of the captains.
これ以上ここを守るのは難しい。会津藩と相談してここを引くことにした。
We can't hold this place any longer. I talked to the Aizu and we're leaving. Harada frowned.
ここを捨ててどこに行くって言うんだ。
And going where?
淀城に引く。本営のあるあの城にこもって敵を一気に叩く。
Yodo Castle. We'll fortify and resupply there, then attack. Yodo Castle. Castle in the Yodo domain is built at the confluence of Kizu, Katsura, and Uji rivers. He turned immediately to Saito and continued, leaving no time for further questions.
サイトは負傷者をまとめろ。長倉、原田、お前らは動ける奴らを連れて引き口の確保だ。
Saito, you get the wounded together. Nagakura, Hirada, you two take any men who can still fight and secure a path for our retreat.
それから源さん、すまねえが、ここにある武器や弾薬に金数、敵に渡せねえものの手配と始末を頼む。
Again, pack up our guns, ammunition, money, anything we don't want the rebels getting their hands on. And if you can't get it out, take it, otherwise destroy it. Finished, he stood to leave. I was scared to even speak up, but I was worried what might happen to me if I didn't. Where should I go? He looked down at as if noticing me for the first time.
おお、そうだったな。源さん、こいつも一緒に淀城まで連れて行ってくれ。
Right. Again, can you take her to Yodo Castle? Inui nodded calmly, apparently unaffected by the tense atmosphere.
Ah, わかったよ。
Of course! As soon as Hijikata departed, so did the others, off to fulfill their assigned tasks. No one spoke to me. They hadn't the time. I wanted to talk to someone about anything. Just talking would have done wonders to calm my mind and my heart, but everyone was far too busy to spare a moment to talk to me. At least I could try and help Inui, and not be too much of a burden on anyone else. Repeating that to myself in an effort to calm down, I followed him silently. Let's go! Right. After we had moved out or destroyed the weapons, ammunition, and other things, we snuck out of the magistrate's office. By then, the rest of the Shinsengumi had departed. We were the last to leave. We had just started out when a cannonball landed only feet away. Ah! I blinked awake sometime later. How much later I didn't know. Still groggy, I looked up in time to see one of the walls collapse in flame. We had to leave, quickly. I struggled to my feet and looked around frantically for Inui. Inui? He'd been out there with me when the cannonball had fallen, but now he was nowhere to be seen. To the wall? I rushed over to check, but fortunately it didn't look like there had been anyone under the wall when it collapsed. That relief lasted only a moment, though, quickly replaced by growing anxiety. I had been left behind. The only sound I could hear was the hungry crackling of the flames. They were getting louder by the second. I need to get out of here. Fear gripped my stomach. Fear of being abandoned for dead on the battlefield. I ran, not caring where. All around me gunshots echoed through the night. After a few minutes of desperately running, I began to calm down and started to think through my situation. The city would be too dangerous, which meant that my best option was the forest. The city would be too dangerous and meant that my best I changed direction and ran as fast as I could towards the forest, Yodo Castle, and the Shinsengumi. I think it's this way. The forest at night was frightening, but being alone made it utterly terrifying. I told myself over and over that once I reached Yodo Castle, everything would be fine. I had been moving at a brisk pace for some time, and my legs and chest were beginning to burn.
Tomare!
Stop! Oh! The voice made me jump. I grabbed my short sword with a shaking hand and spun around to see a man dressed in the uniform of a foot soldier. Foot soldier, the name given to infantry soldiers of a rank lower than samurai. Or the foot from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, either one. A sigh of relief escaped my lips. The soldiers of the Satsuma and Chozu wore much more Western garb, which meant this man was an ally. He looked suspicious of me, but I was sure he'd understand once I explained myself. I'm sorry I surprised you, but I need to ask you something. I drew myself up as tall as I could. Have you seen the Shinsengumi around here?
Shinsengumi dato.
The Shinsengumi? He frowned, and I nodded. Yes, I got separated from my division.
Oi! Tekida! Shinsengumi ga ita zo!
Enemy sighted! I got a guy from the Shinsengumi! What? For a second I stood, stunned, looking at the man. Why had he done that? Then I turned and ran. I had no doubt that things would only get worse if I waited for whoever he'd called to show up. What was going on? As I ran breathlessly through the forest, the horrible truth dawned on me. If men who were supposed to be our allies were calling the Shinsengumi an enemy, then they could only have betrayed us. I realized that Shogun's army was going to lose and chosen to switch to the winning side. It made my stomach feel sick. Ah! Suddenly, another foot soldier appeared from the bushes in front of me.
Tsukamaero! Soitsu wa Shinsengumi da!
Catch him! He's from the Shinsengumi! I could hear the first soldier I'd met yelling from behind me. There wasn't anywhere to run now. I drew my sword. You! I struggled to keep my voice calm, even as my hands shook on the hilt of my sword. You abandoned the shogunate! You betrayed us! I saw a flash of guilt across their faces, and then one of the men yelled in response. There's no shogunate left to betray! I decided who my allies and enemies are now! Even if the shogunate isn't in power anymore, they protected you when they were. How can you forget that? I felt my own voice rise as I spoke. You were a samurai, right? Then you took advantage of the shogunate's protection. And now you just turned your back on someone you owe so much to? How can you call yourself samurai? The people I knew in the Shinsengumi were true samurai, whatever their titles. These soldiers barely even deserved to be called men. Unfortunately, they didn't seem to have been particularly cowed by my speech. Instead, they were exchanging confused frowns, not listening at all. That's a pretty high voice for a boy. Is that a girl? Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know why she's dressing like a boy. Does it really matter whether I'm a boy or girl? I glared at them. Did they really think that my sex was more important than how to live an honorable life? Hey, sounds like a bad hentai to me. Hey, we got a girl over here. Come take a look. More men appeared out of the forest, curious to see what the commotion was. Soon, there were at least 10 of them, possibly more. She says she's from the Shinsengumi. If we can capture her and turn her over to the Satsuma, then we might get a reward. They began talking amongst each other, sending the occasional leering grin my way. Yeah, not a bad idea, but I think maybe we should make sure she's a girl first. The look they gave me then was not difficult to interpret. Even if the foot soldiers didn't kill me, I had no illusions about what my fate would be with the Satsuma. Still, I felt only anger towards them, not fear. Could men who had betrayed their word really be called samurai? It was frustrating to think that I would die on the sword of a coward. Still, I decided if I was to die, then I would take as many of them with me as I could. I took a deep breath, wrapped my hand tightly around the hilt of my sword, and waited for it to begin. The brilliant silver white of a blade flashed in the dark forest, and half of the men surrounding me simply crumpled to the ground. They didn't move. A man stepped into the light.
Oi, ここで何をしている?
Oh, what are you doing here? He was the last person I expected to see. Kazama? I wasn't the only person he had surprised.
なんだ貴様?
What are you?
これは俺たちの獲物だ。勝手に後から来て手を出すな。
She's ours. Just back off and you won't get hurt. Their weapons shook as they backed slowly away from Kazuma. He scowled at them.
うるさい.
Shut up! Almost as an afterthought, he swung his arm in a lazy arc. The remaining soldiers collapsed. Huh, pathetic! He turned away from the corpses and sheathed his bloody sword. Then he looked at me. I looked back, refusing to lower my guard. We held that pose for several moments before he sighed in exasperation.
もう一度聞く。ここで何をしている?
I'll ask you again. What are you doing here? Oh, I'd completely forgotten his question. I mulled it over for a moment. Kazuma was in the employ of the Satsuma, so I didn't want to tell him anything about the Shinsengumi, but Kazuma had just saved my life despite whatever else had passed between us before. In that light, to not tell him at least something seemed awfully rude. When I spoke, my voice was unexpectedly weak. I was thinking of going to Yodo Castle. Kazuma narrowed his eyes.
なるほど。伏見奉行所を捨てて淀城に逃げるつもりか。
I see! Abandoning Fushimi to retreat to Yodo Castle! I kept my mouth shut. I would answer his question if I had to, but I wouldn't volunteer anything more. He stared at me for several more seconds, then gave a frustrated sigh.
それにしても、お前のことを守ると言っていたはずだが、これはどういう状況だ?
Didn't they say they would protect you? What are you doing here? I rankled at his implied insult towards the Shinsengumi. It's not their fault. I got lost. His mouth twitched up into a sarcastic smile.
お前を守ったのは奴らではなくこの俺か。皮肉だな。
And it was I who protected you. How ironic. There didn't seem to be any malice behind his smile, but I wasn't anywhere near ready to trust him, but I couldn't deny that without his intervention I would almost certainly have died. Thank you. I gave him a quick, shallow bow. For saving me. His face didn't change.
その刀は収めろ。今ここでお前をさらう気はない。
Put your sword away. I'm not here to kidnap you. Oh. I'd forgotten that the sword was still out. Kazuma had saved me, and if he intended to kidnap me or kill me, he could have easily done so already. Somewhat reluctantly, I slid the blade back into its scabbard.
これからどうするつもりだ?
What do you intend to do now? I'm putting up the other character's voice by accident. That seems strange. Why should he care about my plans? Still, they were hardly a great secret. I'm planning to head for Yodo Castle. I need to join the rest of the Shinsengumi as soon as I can. He shrugged and gave me another tight half grin.
新選組のところか。やめた方がいい。
Whew, that wouldn't be a good idea. Why? His words were slippery. It felt as if he were insulting the Shinsengumi, but I couldn't quite figure out how. Of course, he had no say in or what I did or didn't do, but if he had a reason to try and stop me, I should probably know what it was.
この周辺はすでに薩長軍に制圧されている。仲間のところに戻るには、その中を抜けていかなければならない。
The Satsuma already controlled the land between here and Yodo Castle. To join your friends, you would have to make your way through an army. Oh. What he was saying made sense. I had just run into some enemy soldiers, and without Kazuma's help, I would have died, and something else, but we won't mention it. My chances of surviving another similar encounter were very low. For several moments, I thought silently. Kazuma gave me his half smile.
もう一つ教えてやろう。奴らが向かっている淀城は薩長軍に寝返る。
Let me tell you a little secret. Yodo Castle is about to switch sides. What? Did he mean that Yodo Castle would betray the shogunate too? No, they wouldn't.
淀藩は薩長に寝返り、奴らは城に入れない。 孤立したところを敵味方から狙い撃ちにされ撤退することになるだろう。
The Yodo domain intends to ally itself with Satsuma Chosu. Your friends won't be able to get into the castle. Trapped between an advancing enemy and a locked gate, they'll have to withdraw.
今お前が言っても足手まといになるだけだ。やめておけ。
Dang it. Oh well. If you did manage to reach them, you'd only get in the way. You better you don't go. Are you telling me the truth? He frowned.
嘘を言ってどうなる。もう徳川は終わりだ。
Why would I lie? The Tokugawa shogunate is over, dead. Whatever Kazuma's other faults were, my encounters with them so far suggested that lying wasn't one of them. If the Yodo domain is going to betray them, then that just means I really have to hurry. Kazuma scowled, but before he could speak, I continued. The Shinsengumi don't know they've been betrayed, but if I can tell them, then maybe they can get away safely. Kazuma sighed.
わからないようだな。教えてやろう。
You don't understand. Here, let me show you. Without waiting for me to follow, he turned and began to walk. I hesitated for a moment, not sure if it was wise to follow him or not. If he intended to harm me, now was my chance to escape. No, if he'd wanted to hurt me, he could have done so already. I nodded quickly to myself and set off after him. Calling whatever Kazuma was following a path would have been generous. At least he seemed to simply be heading up.
京にいる各藩に朝廷からの密書が渡った。薩長軍が錦の旗を立てる。味方せよ。とな。
The Imperial Court has sent a secret message to all the domains in Kyoto. It says that the Satsuma Chosu army will raise the Imperial battle standard. Kazuma's tone was so matter-of-fact and his pace was so brisk that for a moment I didn't understand what he'd said. Then realization hit, bringing me up short. The Imperial battle standard? The Imperial battle standard. The standard in the Imperial army was customarily given to the commander by the Emperor and represented the commander's directive to destroy enemies of the court. The standard was only granted by the Imperial Court to armies who had acted specifically in its name, and anyone who opposed an army matching it was a criminal and a traitor. Then you're saying that the Imperial Court believes in what the Satsuma Chosu are trying to do? He nodded.
天皇の旗を立てた薩長軍が官軍となり、徳川軍が属軍となる。
The Satsuma Chosu army will become the Imperial army, and the men loyal to Tokugawa will become the rebels. Imperial Army. The army of the Imperial Estate, and by extension the Emperor. It was used to refer to armed forces loyal to the Meiji government.
今各藩は官軍につくか属軍につくかで大揉めだろう。
I have no doubt that each domain is considering their options very carefully right now. Attacking the Imperial army was a serious offense to the Emperor. Even domains who had been especially loyal to Shogunate were likely wavering.
淀藩、津藩、鳥取藩、芸州藩、そして尾張藩。こいつらは間違いなく官軍につく。
The Yodo, Zeus, Totori, Gishu, and Owari domains will almost certainly throw their support behind the Imperial army. Su domain, a domain governed by the daimyo Tudo. Although he was an opposition daimyo, he was given the same respect as the predecessor. Totori domain, although their lord was the older brother of Shogun Yoshinobu Tokugawa, they assisted the Imperial army during the Battle of Toba, Fushima, and many subsequent battles. Gishu, referring to the Hiroshima domain, who allied with the Choshu and Satsuma domains and joined the Imperial army. Owari domain, the leader and largest of the three branches of the Tokugawa clan. The lord of this domain was higher in rank than the lords of the other two. But I didn't want to believe that the domains who had been loyal to the shogunate for so long would betray it so easily. Kyoto Castle is the headquarters of the shogunate army, and the Owari have always been friends of the shogun. My voice felt very small. Kazuma stopped walking.
そう思うなら見てみろ。
Have a look. Tell me what you believe. He gestured out in front of us. Oh no. Below us I could see the city of Kyoto, engulfed in the fires of war. Cannons boomed and rifles cracked, and shogunate soldiers fell as the fire stretched higher and higher, licking at the sky. Kazuma pointed to a group of cannons and riflemen. Is that Yodo? I hadn't really thought Kazuma was lying, but a part of me had hoped he was. Looking down at the scene laid out before me, there was no question that he'd been telling the truth. It'd be pointless to try and find the Shinsengumi now.
これでこの戦もほぼ決した。薩長の天下だ。
This war is over already. The Satsuma Chozu will win.
こうなってはお前の仲間があがこうとも流れは変わらん。
Your friends can fight all they like. It won't change anything. Why did this happen?
Lord Yoshinobu, who had capitulated to their initial demands and ceded power to the imperial court, it was clear to everyone that he had no intention of opposing the emperor.
Why did the emperor give them the imperial battle standard?
Anyone who supported the forces of the shogun would be considered criminals now.
薩摩や長州にとっては250年の不満が蓄積して倒幕までこぎつけた。
The Satsuma and Chosu had spent 250 years hating the Tokugawa and waiting for this moment.
何が何でも徳川家を滅亡させねば気が済まないのさ。
They won't be satisfied until Yoshinobu and his entire family are destroyed.
There was no rancor in his voice. He had no hate for the Tokugawa, no love for them either.
I had thought that Lord Yoshinobu was on good terms with the emperor.
Compared to shoguns who had preceded him at least, he had always been happy to cooperate with the court.
最後に朝廷を手に入れた奴が勝者だ。それが天下取りの戦だ。
The winner of this war will be whoever can seize control of the imperial court.
Then the Tokugawa had been abandoned?
There were people fighting for the Tokugawa who devoted their lives to the emperor.
The Shinsengumi had always tried to honor the emperor even as they served the shogun. They never would have intended to defy the imperial court. Kazuma looked suddenly withdrawn, almost sad. There was a long pause before he
頑
spoke.
張ったか。所詮俺たち鬼や新選組は大きな組織や時勢の流れの一部に過ぎない。
Devotion, huh? In the end, it doesn't matter. Demons, Shinsengumi, we're all only pebbles in the avalanche.
I was completely powerless. Even if I didn't care for the decisions of the imperial court, there was nothing I could do to change what was happening to my country. I knew that, but still.
It's not over yet.
Perhaps I was hoping that Kazuma would acknowledge that there was some tiny glimmer of hope left. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I trusted him, but I didn't believe he would lie to me.
There are a lot of soldiers left at Osaka Castle, and there are more in Edo if we can get back there.
言ったはずだ。奴らは賊軍になったと。
You don't understand. They'll be rebels, traitors.
I could hear exasperation in his
国
voice.
中が敵になる。しまいだよ。
This whole country will become their enemy. It's over.
But before I could respond, a raucous cheer drifted up to us from the city
よ
below.
うやく近畿も出たか。晴れて薩長軍が官軍となった。徳川は完全な朝敵だ。おいおい追討令も出るだろう。
They've raised the imperial standard. Now the Satsuma and Chozu army is the imperial army, and the Tokugawa are enemies of the court. The emperor will give the order for the destruction soon.
Is this the end for the Shinsengumi? Has our main character been thrown out of the scenes of war and forced back into the shadows of the story? And what about Kazuma? What is his role in all of this? Does he really not care for this war? And does he still intend to have his way with me? Find out in the next episode of Hakuōki, Stories of the Shinsengumi. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next episode.